All right, thank you for all showing up on time. I'm very pleased to see you all here. This is our symposium on religious leadership and the humanities. The symposium is designed to give you a little bit of insight into the way that religion can play a role in occupational choices and lifestyle choices. Our panelists today are listed on your handout that you received as you walked in. From the Pasdena Buddhist temple, we have Reverend Rosenthal. Everyone please welcome him. From St. Vincent's Meals on Wheels, we have Sister Alice Marie. From the graduate school at the Fuller Theological Seminary, she's a graduate student in psychology. We have Sarah Taylor. And from the Zoroastrian Association of America, we have Zarrir, Bhandara. All right, so what we'll do is we'll ask these questions in the order that you see them on your handout so that you can follow along with questions. Some of them are long, so make sure that you're reading along with us as we're asking the questions. And I guess we can just go in order from how I introduced everyone. So Reverend Rosenthal, if you don't mind starting us off with the first question, what is the most positive thing that working for your religion has brought to you?
All right. I think, especially in Buddhism, probably the most difficult thing is to honestly see yourself, to deal with who you think you are when it bumps against what you find that you really are. Quite often, our ego, when we think we are doing something proper, allows us to continue in the same vein. But let me very quickly give you an example how this doesn't work. I'm an American, born and raised here, but all my training was in Japan, in Asia. And it's very different, if you've ever studied there, than in America. I lived in a dormitory while I was a monk, a student there for the priesthood. And I lived up on the 4th floor with the other foreign students. I had to go to my temple earlier than anyone else in my classes. So when I would come down early in the morning, outside of the office, there was a bulletin board, like a blackboard. And thinking that I'm such a conscientious, good religious student, every morning when I went to school, before the other ministerial students were heading off to their college, I would write the quote of the day, some scriptural doctrine out of the Buddhist texts. And I was very proud of myself, thinking what a good person I am. I'm leaving this inspiring religious message for everyone. One day I'm up in my room, and over the microphone, "Rosenthal, come down to the office." So I come down there, and the head of the department says, "Sit down. Are you the one that's been writing on my blackboard all of those religious messages every morning?" Yes, I thought, I'm going to get praised for this. Who do you think you are writing those things? You're just a student. What do you think you know about Buddhism, about religion? Who do you think you are that you are leaving those messages for the other students that are probably better than you? Go erase it and don't ever write on my board again. He was really mad. So this is just an example where I think the most positive thing in working in my religious capacity, and this was even from being a student as I'm explaining today, was to realize I'm not really as good or as proficient or as honest or generous as I think I am. So that's how I think I would answer as to what is positive for me as a ministerial student and now as a priest, to be able to always reflect against the religion, so to speak, as a guide, as a foundation, as to what I really am and how I should aspire to become more than I am in light of tradition and religious background.
Thank you, Reverend. Sister?
When it says working for your religion, I thought right away, my religion is who I am. I am a religious. I became a daughter of charity in 1954. So I've been a sister about 56 years, going on 57. So I entered when I was 19 years old. So you can figure out how old I am. I'm going to be 76. So it seems like most of my life I have been a religious. And many of you probably don't know about nuns, and we're kind of a mystery sometimes. They were always a mystery to me. I went to Catholic school. I'm what you call a cradle Catholic. I was born and raised a Catholic, went to Catholic school, had nuns all my life. Never understood them, never got along with them. And I often wondered, there was always this mystery about them. And but I never wanted to be one. I wanted to get married, have 6 boys, and live on a farm. I love to bake and cook and keep house. I thought that would be just ideal. But like we were taught later on when I became a sister, that we don't choose our vocation. God chooses us. And I felt that he did call me, and I can look back and see many, many ways where he kept me out of a lot of trouble just for where I am today. And I feel like my religion has been my whole life, and I've always been very, it's kind of, a lot of it's a mystery. I have a lot of faith, and I always felt that I was doing what God wanted me to do, and I could never say why I thought that. He doesn't come and speak to me, like just say, Sister Alice Marie, go do such and such. But I've always felt very close to him, and it's I have a great deal of faith and a great deal of trust. And I think my religion and being a sister has increased that. We were founded by St. Vincent de Paul, and many of you have heard about the St. Vincent de Paul Society. And St. Vincent de Paul was a priest in the 1600s, and he founded our community to help the poor. And there were quite a few poor in Paris, and our community spread throughout the whole world. And I went to nurses training in El Paso, Texas, and I met the Daughters of Charity. And I really liked them right away. The others I never did feel close to. But these sisters went out to visit the poor. We used to go with them as student nurses and help people get clothes and food and help them with their homes. And there were a lot of poor people in El Paso. And so I decided, I think I want to do that. And I guess it was God calling me to that vocation. So I have, that was my initial idea. I want to just help the poor. And doing that, I've become really close to God and to my religion. And I am in no way perfect, and we try every day by what I do and trying to be kind and patient and sweet. The hardest thing is being sweet. I go to work every morning. I tell the staff, I have 98 staff, I said, I'm going to be sweet today. And they all shake their head and roll their eyes. And I'm not really bad, but it's just so many problems and things. But you always try to think of the person and the other person, and try to be kind and charitable and listen. And I'm very independent. I'm very controlling, and I like my own way. And that's why I like to be the boss. And I am the boss. But my whole life is my religion. I don't know anything outside of that, and everything I do is really kind of focused on God in my life. And many of our employees were born and raised Catholic and don't go to church. Half of my family doesn't go to church anymore, and that's kind of a thing. But I say you don't make them feel guilty. You say, well, religion is really all about you and God, and when you die, it's just going to be you and God. It's not going to be anybody else. And you have to work on that relationship with God. And I think a church, at any church, Protestant, Catholic, Buddhist, anything, helps you to get that relationship with God so that you know Him and you know God loves you. And you just look around this world that God has created for us. And so I think it's all tried to just get to know God and to let Him be a big part of your life and to be good. I think you just be good and be good to one another. And I just think I can't say anything else. I have a great deal of joy because of what I do. And I do feed the poor, and I like it a lot. And I feel that that's why I'm here. And so I'm very happy with what I do.
Thank you. Pasdena?
Well, as someone who is studying psychology and a therapist and also a Christian, I think that I guess, religion and psychology, people haven't always thought that the two of those could go together in any way. In fact, it seemed like many psychologists or therapists, and then also on the other side, religious people have felt, in therapy or when you're learning about mental health and those things, that you don't need to bring religion or spirituality into that. And I think for a while that was more of a popular belief or fear even from both sides that the two couldn't be brought together. And in my work as a therapist, I've been able to counsel people of not just a Christian religion, but all different religions. And I've had the privilege to listen to people express their concerns, their joys, their thoughts about their own faith, be it mine or not mine. And a lot of the time, these people, they felt like they weren't allowed to bring it up in therapy for some reason. So if they did bring something up and then I would ask a further question, asking them, tell me why this is important to you, they would seem really surprised, thinking kind of why would I have them bring this up in therapy? But I've found that it can be really healing because for a lot of people, their spirituality defines a lot of who they are, and it defines who they are, what they do in the day, different reasons why they may be feeling depressed or even happy about how things are going. So I've just felt really privileged being able to work with people and talk about some of these things, some more serious than others, and give them a place that's safe where they can talk about their spirituality. I also think one of the positive things for me has been, I feel like I've had to be challenged myself to really be in touch with my own spirituality and what I believe, because if I'm going to feel comfortable talking to others, even people of a different faith than me, it works better when I feel good and comfortable myself talking about my own spirituality. So it's challenged me to also ask more questions and think more deeply about what it means for me to be a Christian myself.
Thank you.
To answer this question, it brings me peace, supreme satisfaction and happiness. And I quote from Zoroastrian religion of Prophet Zarathustra, which always asks us to be happy. And how do we be happy is by doing good to others, by doing something that is righteous for the sake of righteousness. And when you do that, you become happy. The other quote is, when you make others happy, you become happy. And in my personal life, as a priest in India, when we used to go for social work, along with my professor, a social work professor, when she introduced me to Mother Teresa's home, what we used to do, we used to pick up the beggars and the people who do not have any means and who are dying on the road. We would bring them, we would give them a bath, and as they are dying, they would get that dignity whilst they are dying. And the happiness that we talk about, that we get in the materialistic world, is totally different than what you experience the person when the person is dying and you are taking care of that person, and the eyes that is looking at you, they cannot even say thank you because they do not even have energy. The people who are sick on the road, who are diseased, we bring them, we try to heal them. Like some people have tuberculosis, TB, some people have leprosy, and we go and massage them and give them different kinds of therapy and play with the abandoned kids in that home. And that kind of work when you do, through your religion, through your spirituality, that kind of happiness, when you experience that kind of happiness, you would feel that this is the real happiness.
Thank you. Dr. Milne will ask our next question.
All right. This question is, at any point in your life, has your choice to integrate religion in your life so substantially come into conflict with some other aspect of your life, either professionally, socially, or personally? Why don't we start with Reverend Rosenthal?
Thank you. I don't think I've ever made a choice to integrate religion into my life. My last name is Rosenthal, which, as most of you know, it's a German name, but it's Jewish. My background is Jewish. So when I first studied for the Buddhist priesthood, of course, it was not as common as it is today to find many people of all different walks of life interested in studying the Buddhist teachings. So when people meet me, even today that haven't met me before, one of the first questions I get asked is, how did you convert to Buddhism? You know, isn't Rosenthal a Jewish name? So usually the first thing, tongue-in-cheek, I say, yeah, well, I'm the Dalai Lama, you know. But I do get asked all the time, you know, what's this nice little white Jewish boy doing in Asia as a monk? Because in those days, you know, my head was shaved and I wore my robes. I lived in the temples. And it made me think, I never made a choice to do this. It's like planting a seed, and one day it grows into a little sapling, and one day it's a tree, provides shade, and down the road it provides delicious fruit to nourish people. But an example that I'll use, if you allow me, is, let's say we all aspire to become butterflies, but we hate those creepy, crawly, little furry caterpillars. So we go around smashing caterpillars. And then one day we wonder, gee, you know, I haven't seen any monarch butterflies lately. What happened to all the butterflies? Well, did they convert? The potential in every caterpillar to become a butterfly is inherent in its nature. And in every beautiful butterfly is also a caterpillar. So I don't think that a caterpillar makes a choice to convert to be a butterfly. As one of my teachers in Japan used to say, in referring to Buddhahood, which is the inherent potential for all of us to become enlightened, he said, Buddhahood is like adulthood in a child. If your son or daughter, when they were young, should ask you, Mom or Dad, what must I do to grow to be a man? What must I do to grow to be a woman? The Buddhist answer would be, do nothing. Oh, you'd say, what a lousy parent. What do you mean, do nothing? You don't care what they do? That's not what it means. It means inherent in every child, inherent in every one of us, when we were little babies, was the people who are sitting in this room today. Adulthood, the potential for growth and development, is inherent in every child, in every baby, in everyone, regardless of race or color or creed or religion. So, my answer to this is, I've never made the choice to integrate religion in my life. I'm still metamorphosing, you might say, like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. And I'll close with this. There was this one, well, many, but in this case, there was this elderly lady in Japan who would walk for miles when one pushing those little carts, you know, it's hard to walk. Literally for miles, she would come from some part of Kyoto where I live to our mother temple. Rain or shine, and I would see her about a mile away because I lived near the temple, and I was on my bicycle. About a mile into my route going to school, I'd see her coming the other direction every day. So one day I saw her at the mother temple because I would go first for morning services very early in the morning. And so some of my friends, my classmates, they said, go ask that lady about her faith. So I approached this elder lady, and of course I'm speaking in Japanese to her, and I said, "Excuse me, but you must be a woman of deep faith. I see you rain or shine coming every day, walking," and it was so hard for her to walk, it must have taken her hours. I said, "Your faith must be profound, must be very deep." She looks up at me with these gentle eyes, and she said, the equivalent, she's speaking Japanese, the equivalent of, "I have no faith." I was shocked. I'm thinking, what do you mean you have no faith? But after she started to explain, I realized what she meant is, it's not my possession, it's not my faith. In essence, the movement of mercy and compassion, the Buddha's wisdom and compassion, is imparted to me. It belongs to the Buddha. Even my faith, you could say, comes from a higher source. So she said, I have no faith. Because in essence, when I'm empty, that leaves room to be filled with the mercy and the compassion of spiritual love. If she would have said, I am a person of deep faith, that means there's, to use a Judeo-Christian term, there's no room for God to enter my life. But if you say you're empty and have faith in God, then you can be filled to the brim, to overflowing with God's mercy and compassion. Of course, I'm using the word God just to make it generic. So I would say I have no faith. And I have never decided to convert to be a Buddhist. And I have never made the decision to integrate religion into my life. It has always been moving in my direction for my benefit.
Thank you.
I'll try not to be too talkative, excuse me. But I think I feel the same way. I've never had a choice, never made a choice to integrate religion. It just seems to be my life, and it is a religious life. And I have never had conflict, I guess because most of my life has been spent in the kitchen. And I don't rub shoulders with great professionals. I go out and talk to people. We have to raise $5 million a year just to subsidize our feeding program for the poor. And I go out and I tell people about the program and why we need it. I don't really come out and ask them for money. But I talk to all kinds of people, and our program is for everyone, no matter what their religion or their age. As long as they have a nutritional need and we're able to fill it, we do that. And so I've always been, I felt, pretty well respected and accepted by everyone because of what I am. And I guess I've never had that being shunned because I was a nun. A lot of young people laugh at you when you go by, and one man, I used to ride my bike on the beach a lot, early in the morning, 6 o'clock. And I'd always say good morning to everybody, and they were half asleep, and they looked at me like I was from outer space. And I wore a white habit when I went biking, and one day a man went by, and I said, good morning, and he looked really annoyed because I kind of woke him up. And so a few minutes later, I heard him behind me, and he stopped. He said, can I ask you something? So I stopped, and I said, sure. And he looked at me, and he said, are you an authentic nun? I said, yes. And he said, cool. And he just turned around and left. And I thought, I wouldn't dress like this if I didn't have a reason. But I just thought that. But a lot of kids, and we found that in San Francisco one time, we were walking down a neighborhood, and we used to have a habit that was a lot worse than this. It used to be, you all are too young, because we changed it in 1964. But you remember the flying nun? That was the habit we wore. We had a blue habit, and we had these big wings, and they were really big. And so people would see you on the street, and they'd duck because they're afraid they're going to get hit in the eye. And kids always used to make fun of us and just laugh at us, but it was just because we looked funny and they didn't know about us. But I wouldn't say that anybody, I never had any problem with that. But more often than none, people usually kind of, now they say it's so nice to see a sister in a habit because so many don't wear them. But, and on the airplane, I found that the stewardesses always sit a little old lady next to me who's scared of flying. She says, you come sit by sister and you'll be okay. And they don't know sister's as scared as she is. I said, God, don't let anything happen to this plane because you're going to get a bad name if something happens. So I think I've had professionally, socially, and personally, I've really had a wonderful life being religious and my faith, and people ask me about it. But I can also reiterate that it has brought me a great joy in my life.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor?
I think what I first thought of is when I was deciding where to go study psychology for graduate school. And I got into Fuller, but I also got into another school that was not religiously oriented. And both of them were great schools, and I just really could not decide where to go because I felt like there were good things that came from both of them in my study of psychology. And so I asked a bunch of people for advice. Which school do you think I should go to? And I had my list of pros and cons, and of course, different people. Some people have really strong opinions, one way or the other. And I talked to one of my good friends who, I think she was just about to graduate with the same, with the degree that I was going into, and she told me. She said, she thought they were both great schools. She was also a Christian, but she said that people would not, she didn't think people would respect my degree in psychology, especially because it was in psychology, if I went to like a seminary like Fuller. Especially, she said they'll think you're trying to convert them, which wasn't what I wanted to do, and I never wanted to do that. But I did want to study. I realized the integration between my faith and psychology, and so it was interesting sitting there and weighing, where should I go, especially when I had good friends that had really strong opinions, don't do it. And ultimately, I decided to go to Fuller, and I still think it could have been great for me to go to the other graduate school, and I think I would have had a great education that way as well, and I think I could still be a spiritual person and a therapist if I went there, but I am glad that I did make the choice to go to Fuller because it has been important to me to be able to study in my classes and be able to talk about how our faith kind of combines with just ourselves, our mental health, and who we are as a whole person in general. Kind of looking at the person as a whole, and that includes your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. So that's been really good for me. The other thing I thought was I've had a lot of talks with people who have said, why would you need to go to a therapist? Why can't you just pray and then God should make it better? Who have kind of felt conflict, I get, with the field of psychology. And for me, I guess I look at that like, not everyone would do this, but many people, if they're sick, would go to the doctor. And they may also pray as well. And I personally feel that way about psychology and mental health, that God can use me as someone that people can go to and see to help them, and that God can work through me in that, and that it's not a bad thing to seek help, and you can also pray as well, but it's not a bad thing to seek mental health.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Being a Zoroastrian priest, the Zoroastrian faith gives me more meaning to my life, makes me perfect, and I grow and evolve each and every single day. It keeps me on track. Whatever actions that I do, whatever words I utter, and whatever thoughts that I think, it keeps me on track in terms of being more productive and more progressive in life, and not only for myself, but helping others to do the same, making them more productive, more progressive in their lives. By doing so, through my faith, it helps me to make this life wonderful and gives me utter satisfaction and happiness, the supreme bliss that we talked earlier. That is what I derive from this.
Thank you.
So, next question was, what particular spiritual or religious practice or ritual is most important to you as an individual? Reverend Rosenthal?
Thank you. When I lived in Japan, I took special training in what might be considered ritual. Orthodox Buddhism, if you will, in Japan. In America, most people think of just meditation, but if you live in Asia, Buddhist monks have long hours, literally sometimes 24 hours a day of chanting and meditation and cleaning floors and toilets and things like that. And that's all part of your meditation, not just formal sitting. And so I would say personally, I gain great peace of mind or satisfaction when I'm with other monks chanting, and the more ritualistic side of the faith. But now that I'm a priest assigned in America to a temple here in Pasdena, you realize it's much more than just the chanting or the praying, if you will, the ritualistic side or the meditation. It's service in rites of passage. So I get great joy, for instance, in performing marriages. There was a dear friend of mine who died of pancreatic cancer a couple of years ago. And it was one time when, as a priest, it was very, very difficult because I was so close to this friend and his family. And he suffered and endured a lot of pain through the couple of years it took for him to finally pass away. But he was a great inspiration for me. So I would say that in my practice as a priest, it allows me to go into other people's lives where I would be a stranger was I not ordained as a Buddhist monk. And just about a year ago, his eldest daughter called me and asked if I would perform her wedding. So I think that's something that gives me great pleasure. It's like sweet and sour Chinese food, you know. There was memories at her wedding of her father's memorial services and graveside services, and even in the crematorium, I went there to do a formal Buddhist religious ritual before his body was put into the crematorium. But it brings back memories when I was a soldier in the 1960s in Vietnam. I was a combat medic before I became a priest. And I remember, and still, to be honest, get flashbacks of holding people in my arms that died there. And some were Vietnamese, some were what we would consider the enemy. And I remember and think that when they looked up at my face, that I was literally cradling them in my arms. The last thing they saw before they passed through this earth was my face. So I feel honor-bound to do something with my life spiritually, to remember in a sense that their legacy has been passed to me. The last thing when they looked up that they saw in this human life was me. So it isn't just a matter of meditation or chanting long hours or whatever. I think at times of funerals or times of visiting a sick person, I get called quite often to Huntington Hospital late at night. It's to realize if it wasn't for the honor of being able to, I'm not wearing my robes today, but to be wearing the robes that I'm allowed to wear, that so many people contributed in my life to be able to wear, I would be a stranger. I wouldn't be at that hospital holding that person's hand or being at their bedside when they die or joining a young couple in marriage. So this is a great gift, and it makes me reflect, humbly, that in a way we have a great responsibility as spiritual leaders. The formal robes that I wear coming from China have sleeves that would almost touch the floor. And the story is that the reason Buddhist priest robes have such long sleeves is we are making vows when we are ordained to save all suffering people, as if we could put all of you in our sleeves. But I come to realize, just as a man, as a human being, I can't even save myself. That's up to a greater power than I have. And I think that's the greatest practice, is to put your faith humbly into the hands of God, or in this case, into the movement of wisdom and compassion that we call the Buddha. Thank you.
I think a particular spiritual practice with being a Catholic has always been Mass for me, the sacrifice of the Mass. And even when I was young, I can't explain why, but we lived near a church. I'd go to Mass. They have it every day. Whenever I could, I would go to Mass. And I don't know why. It was all through my childhood. And then someone told me one time, it was probably because that's the only place nobody was yelling at you. Because I was usually in trouble for something. And so maybe when I went to church, I was kind of left alone. But I always kind of look back to see, well, maybe God was kind of, getting me ready for something else. And so my spiritual life, I really appreciate the Mass, and I like the rituals, and I like the singing, and I like being together with other people, worshiping together. But as a religious, I guess, and the sacrifice of the Mass and my prayer life enable me to be able to do what I do as a daughter of charity. And I've always been, working in the kitchen, but the last 34 years, I've been involved with Meals on Wheels. And this is, many people have heard about it, but you bring hot, nutritious meals to people in their homes that cannot get out. And most of them that we serve in central Los Angeles and South Central are very poor. They don't have money. They're not able to pay. And so we take care of them anyway. We don't ask their religion. We ask if they can give a small donation, and if they do, that's fine. If they don't, they don't. But in the beginning, I used to go out every day and deliver, and I guess the first 20 years, when I was younger and had better health, and I got to meet all these people, and it was a great joy to, like Reverend said, when you help other people, you get more out of it than they do. I mean, you get a great joy and great satisfaction. And I really enjoyed it. I like to see what they, and they liked the sister, and many of them were not Catholics, but they always felt they could trust me. And I always tried to earn that trust and to be really kind to them, but to be of service. That's our community. One of our rules is to serve the poor. And I do wear an apron every day, and I have different colors. This one, a friend of mine from India gave me, Mrs. Moti, and I wear different colors every day, and an apron is really a symbol of service. And if in any restaurant, any place, anyone that is serving others, they're always wearing an apron. So when you wear an apron, it's a symbol that you are here to serve. And I have really given my life to serve others through the Catholic Church, through being a daughter charity. And I work at it every day, and most Meals on Wheels programs, there's lots of them in the county, there's about 90. Many of them just work 5 days a week, and but we do it 7 days a week. We do it holidays, we do special things, because we try to let them know that many of them are so alone, have no families, that somebody does care about them, and we certainly do. And if they don't want broccoli, they don't have to eat broccoli, and if they don't want chicken, they don't have to eat chicken. We give them kind of what they like. And we have 1,200 clients, and sometimes it gets to be a little hard, but we do it. But we do it because, we love God, and we love the poor, and I love God, and I love the poor. And so the Mass and the prayers in the morning, they give me the energy and the strength that I need, because people say, how do you get all your energy? And I said, well, I read the quote one time that said, God is my strength. And I truly believe in that, and that is one of the great rituals and the practices that I most favor in my church. The holy sacrifice of the Mass, prayer time, and being able to serve others.
I think for me, when I first saw this, I immediately thought of prayer, but then honestly, I don't think I'm always the best at praying for myself or for other people. I wish that I was better at that. And so, kind of like what Sister Alice was saying, I think for me, it's been important to involve myself in a Christian community, and that comes with involving myself in church. And there's been periods of my life when I haven't been the best at attending church regularly, but I've found that it's just, when I do, I always am really glad that I am attending church regularly, especially after I go. I think that I can feel, I don't know, separate or away from God sometimes when I'm just living my life and not reminded of Him in my life, or not around other people that believe the same thing as me. And I think it can be easy for me to just kind of get caught up in that. So being involved in a community of other believers who can pray for me and encourage me to pray for others, as well as getting involved in things like Sister Alice was talking about, which can a lot of the time be done through a church, has been really life-giving for me. And I think it's something that's important and something that I am going to try to do throughout my life.
Thank you.
In Zoroastrianism, the physical life and the spirituality are very much interlinked. Just to give you a little theology about Zoroastrianism, given to us by Prophet Zarathustra, Ahura Mazda is the god, and there are 6 divinities or his own qualities. Sometimes they are also called archangels or deputies of Ahura Mazda. They are 6 in number, and with Ahura Mazda together, they are 7. And each one has got a dual role to perform. One is their own qualities, and the other one is to look after the physical world in terms of having one of the physical aspect that they look after. Like Ahura Mazda, the quality is wisdom. And Ahura Mazda looks after the mankind. He is the creator. He is the giver of life. Now the way it is explained, how we do the worship. We worship God, or we worship these divinities by practicing more of those qualities. So Ahura Mazda is the life giver. So what I would do is, I would save the life. In order to save a life, I have to go somewhere to save a life. And in my life, I have saved about 300 lives by donating my blood products through Red Cross and different places. And I continue to do so. The second quality is Vahumana, or the good mind. And it looks after the cattle. So we make sure that we try to avoid any kind of cruelty towards animals. So we try to become like Ahura Mazda, we try to become like God by improving our own consciousness, by improving our own thinking. That is the good mind, the second quality. The third one is righteousness. We worship righteousness by being more righteous. It is righteousness and order, making sure everything is in order in the world. In our lives, we make sure everything goes in order, and we help others to do the same. The fourth quality is determination, moral strength. Sometimes in life it becomes difficult for us to stand up for what is right. Or for that matter, when you see injustice being done to other people, by practicing this quality of this Amesha Spenta, whenever I see injustice being done to other people, I stand up and speak up. The fifth quality is spontaneity or love, devotion. So whatever we do it with love. We invest our feelings into it, and we spread love amongst us. Amongst us meaning all our community members, that is, all human beings and all living beings, our nature, our environment. The sixth quality is perfection. The fifth quality, the Amisha Spenta looks after the earth, and the sixth quality is plants and perfection. So whatever we try to do, we try to make it perfect. And actually, when you follow the first 5 steps, whatever things you do in your life, it automatically becomes perfect. And the seventh quality is immortality. So, I'm sorry, the sixth one was waters, and the seventh one is the plant kingdom. So you look after our environment, and that is the perfection that you get. So once you follow the first 5 qualities, it becomes perfect, and the 7th quality is immortality. It is always remembered what you do. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last student question. If you were born halfway around the globe in a culture and religion substantially different from your own, do you think you would have found your way back, so to speak, to the religion or ideology you currently identify yourself with? Reverend Rosenthal?
Thank you. This one is quite interesting to me and quite hard to answer. As I mentioned, I was born in the United States, but all of my religious training for the priesthood was in Asia. So if I was born halfway around the world from the perspective of the United States, it would be a lot easier. See? And then you say, well, what if you went the other direction? You ended up, say, in Israel. Well, my background is Orthodox Jew. So I don't know how to answer that in that sense. But the way that I would try for all of our benefit to answer this, when I studied in Japan, one of the first things I noticed in the classrooms was, you know, when you're little kids and you go into an elementary school and they have a map of the world, did you ever notice, like, what's right in the middle of that map? North America. Well, anybody ever study in Asia? What do you think's right in the middle of their maps? Same world, yeah, Asia. So the perspective is pretty much from where culturally we're from. But the same with Reverend Bhandara. He was born in India. So from the perspective of the United States, halfway around the world, it's like he would be born in India. Well, that's where he's from. That's where it came from. So the important thing is people of faith, people of religious faith. God doesn't pick one people or one race or one culture. We do that to each other with our prejudices. A Christian that believes in God, whether they're in Scandinavia or Korea or the United States, are blessed by God the same way. And although I joked around at first one of the questions that, oh, Rosenthal, what kind of Buddhist name is that? Well, the Chinese and Japanese weren't Buddhist to begin with either. That was an imported religion to all of them. So I would just encourage all of us to be people of faith, to realize wherever we go, whatever culture we're from the perspective of God or the movement of wisdom and compassion, as we might say in Buddhism, it doesn't matter what side of the globe you go to. If you're from Korea and you're lonely tonight as a student in the United States because you miss your homeland, what I would say to you, tonight, look up at the moon. Because the same moon that will shine over Pasadena tonight is the same moon that shines over Korea. From the perspective of the moon, there's not two, there's only one. That's the beauty of faith. And so it doesn't really matter where you were born. Just be born into God's heaven, I think, in that sense. Or born into the realm of enlightenment if you're a Buddhist. That's all expansive.
I think two things, and one is that I can say there's certain things that I believe that, say, my family or some of my friends don't believe, but I've chosen to believe just because of who I am and because of different experiences that I've had. I think what I think of is God can reveal himself to people in different ways. And I think about, I mean, some people in parts of the world, you know, they're never introduced to Christianity or other kinds of religions. That's never even spoken. And I really like C.S. Lewis. I think it's in The Last Battle. He writes about, I think it was, I forget. It's someone in one of the characters in his book who never had a chance to know Aslan, and Aslan is kind of like, it's supposed to be kind of like Jesus in the books that he writes, but who was introduced to, I guess it was like another god in his culture, but Aslan lets him go to, I forget, it's like heaven, but Aslan recognizes that he never had the chance to make that choice, and that he lived his life to the best he could, and God may have been revealed to him in a different way. So then God is in Aslan than the other people. So I think of that story, and I think of places in the world where, you know, people don't have freedom of religion, and they can't make that choice. And so, yeah, I like just kind of what both of you have said. I like to think that God, the way people come to their faith looks different for different people.
Thank you.
I think, yes, I would have found my ideology and spirituality that I practice today, even if I was born somewhere else in some other place. Because eventually everybody wants to be happy. And I would have thought about it, how to become happy. And I would have come back to this ideology. I would have come to this ideology eventually. So, yes.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for agreeing to participate today and for taking the time to travel here and talk to us all. Thank you.